Dune has recently re-entered the public consciousness due to the success of its film adaptation, but while the film does an outstanding job of attempting to portray the multi-layered themes within the book itself is a cornucopia of philosophical musings told through fiction. For a book written nearly 60 years ago, the philosophy within Frank Herbert's work is now more relevant than ever. This video will explore how the current state of society can be understood when looking through the Dune lens. Welcome to Culture Inc. On this channel we dive deep into the world of cultural phenomena, including literature, art, sport, fashion, and how those things ultimately shape our society. If that interests you, there's a subscribe button just below the video. I hadn't read Dune before I watched the film. My only reference point was general knowledge, which told me it was widely regarded as being hugely influential in the sci-fi genre. I remember being sat in the cinema feeling quite overwhelmed by the scope of the world that was shown to me. The first time I watched it, I left feeling as though all I had learned about Dune was just how little I knew about it in the first place. It felt like the film was holding something back, but this felt understandable. The medium of film is usually a bit too restrictive to be able to illustrate the huge scope of science fiction books, especially those that span across multiple planets, races and religions. But I couldn't shake the feeling that some of the criticism I was reading online felt hugely misplaced. The idea that Dune was just another white saviour story struck the same tone I felt when Game of Thrones was receiving the same criticism for Daenerys, simply being a white saviour and nothing more. Just as the reality of Daenerys was deeply more complicated and interesting, I could feel the character of Paul Atreides was meant to teach us more. For a piece of literature to resonate with so many and lay a foundation for a whole genre, there had to be deeper fundamental roots to Dune. Greatness is a transitory experience. It is never consistent. It depends in part upon the myth-making imagination of humankind. The person who experiences greatness must have a feeling for the myth he is in. He must reflect what is projected upon him, and he must have a great sense of the sardonic. This is what uncouples him from belief in his own pretensions. The sardonic is all that permits him to move within himself. Without this quality, even occasional greatness will destroy a man. From Collected Sayings of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. The first Dune book centers around Paul Atreides and his rise from noble prince of a wealthy house to emperor of the galaxy. How did he achieve this rapid rise to ultimate power? On the back of a myth, which united a whole race of a planet behind him. A myth set in motion centuries before Paul was even born. A myth so powerful and binding that Paul himself had no real control or power over it. Once Paul was consumed by the myth, he was at the whim of its waves. This is portrayed beautifully in Dune, with the majority of Paul's inner dialogue ultimately becoming a story of struggle as he battles with the reality only he knew, that he was an imposter. The people responsible for pushing the first domino that started the butterfly effect were the Bene Gesserit, an ancient and adept organisation who privately denied they were a religious order, but who operated behind an almost opaque screen of ritual mysticism, and whose training, whose symbolism, organisation, and internal teaching methods were almost wholly religious. The sisterhood consisted of all women spies, nuns, scientists, and theologians who used genetic experimentation, galactic political interference, and religious engineering to further their own agenda of ascending the human race with the advent of their chosen one, the Kwisatz Haderach. Thousands of years before the events of Dune, the Bene Gesserit visited planets across the Dune universe, implanting legends and stories. With the passing of time, the origins of these myths are lost, and their sheer repetition through the generations of families embeds a reality of truth, which is tied to the faith or identity of the people of the planet. The Sisterhood's ultimate plan being that they could tactically activate any of these myths to socially engineer a future that they wanted to create. In the case of the planet Arrakis, where Dune is mainly set, they told the indigenous people there, the Fremen, that one day a saviour would arrive who would unite the people underneath them. However, Paul was always aware of the myth. He used it to his advantage to survive, embodying the role of the Messiah despite knowing he was a mere mortal. While Paul would struggle with his own sense of reality, reality for the horde of believers he used to get to the top was starkly different. What his existence meant to them as individuals and as a collective was starkly different. To them he truly was a Messiah, one who had been spoken about for generations, the main character of a story passed on for centuries. Paul represented the final piece which would bring the myth into reality, with him as the saviour of the planet Arrakis. This myth fused him to the future it dictated, a life which meant he had to simultaneously exist in two dual realities, with the ultimate price being very real consequences for a whole galaxy. The consequences of Paul triggering the myth was the death of 60 billion people across the known universe, as a result for him triggering a jihad which spread beyond his own control. However, what really makes the reader or viewer feel the weight of such an outcome was the fact that it was all due to a lie told thousands of years ago, but still a lie, a piece of religious engineering extrapolated across millennia. In our own history, myth has been consistent in creating a shared identity for humans since the dawn of early society. Whether this manifested through national heroes, religions, or cultural customs, the idea that a common story can tie together a group of people is one of the most powerful tools in human history. While in the pre-modern age, it was more likely that these myths might have been believed as having been born in literal truth, their adaptation to modern times hasn't seen the importance of myth diminish. In fact, truth itself has taken on a new meaning. Twisted so out of shape by constant media arbitrage, myths which once took generations to adapt and embed themselves into our shared consciousness can suddenly be called upon or activated by those who wish to abuse them. With the modern age of communication enabling a speed and precision which can suddenly influence a whole populace, shifting the course of society and taking a life of its own. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was Brexit. But nobody quite knew what that word meant. And then the oracle spoke. Brexit means Brexit. Calypso Nicolaides, University of Oxford. When looking at the recent success of political movements across the Western world, a rise in populism has also given way to a rise in the use of myth, in an attempt to bound a group of people under a political banner. Understanding politics through this lens is not necessarily a new thing, but now it feels more relevant than ever. Roland Barthes famously sought to expose how modern myths inspired by older ones oppress or mask the true reality of political and market power. Barthes wrote about this by analysing adverts and slogans that were released during a similar time period to when Frank Herbert wrote Dune. This overlap is probably a complete coincidence, but one can't help but think whether there was something rising in the social consciousness during that time, something which made individuals question why they were being communicated to so heavily through the use of stories in the media. When looking at Donald Trump's recent use of Make America Great Again, the application of myth is clear. The slogan is deliberately vague yet powerful, activating any latent emotional disconnect voters could have had with a whole range of issues in America. The underlying message being, there was once a time where people did not have the issues you are currently having, and there can be a time like that again. Simply vote us into power. On British shores, the externalities of Brexit, which was itself influenced by various reminders of Great Britain and what British identity meant, can still be felt. Suella Braverman's sudden intense interest in UK borders simultaneously seems to say, we want to keep Britain British and powerful, yet ignore how Britain became powerful in the first place and built that foundation. The use of nostalgia of the old empire, the old way of doing things, the once great, is hugely influential. Britain is currently going through a huge cost of living crisis amongst the plethora of other social, economic and cultural issues. Realistically, these should be the issues we are tackling. Yet, the current narrative is one of cultural division. An open invitation to subtly remind individuals, you once were happy and united, there is an issue, but we can unite against it under what binds us together, our shared mythos. As a disclaimer, while these examples happen to be successful use of myth from the right wing, this is kind of to be expected. Conservatism will always be a bit more sentimental around ideas of heritage, and so that will come out in their political slogans. There's plenty of uses of myth on the left too, but recently the ones mentioned seem to have worked most successfully on the right. However, this video is not looking to convince you whether one side is wrong or right. The more interesting question is, what are we really being shown? Why is it that triggering ideas surrounding myths can be so emotionally powerful? What should we really understand about who our shared stories actually benefit? When being told stories about ourselves, does one ever know how the story ends? And Paul saw how futile were any efforts of his to change any smallest bit of this. He had thought to oppose the jihad within himself, but the jihad would be. His legions would rage out from Arrakis even without him. They needed only the legend he had already become. Frank Herbert, Dune. Thank you for watching. This is my first ever video, so I hope you enjoyed it. It was kind of nerve-wracking and I had to deal with a lot of, cringing at myself while making it and recording it. Hearing your own voice is a really horrible thing, especially when trying to get to grips with video editing for the first time and stuff like that. But I'm really passionate about this kind of stuff and I think about it all the time and I watch these kind of videos all the time. I'm going to be making more videos on weird cultural crossovers or things that I find interesting that reference real life. So if you enjoyed the video, please do give me a like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment underneath with anything that you found interesting or any feedback be most appreciated.